first time Adam noticed it, he dismissed it as a trick of the light. He had just returned from a weekend trip to an old countryside inn, a charming but isolated place surrounded by forests. A perfect getaway from the city. He had taken dozens of photos, some of the rolling hills, the winding dirt roads, the abandoned barn near the inn that looked almost haunted in the evening light. But it wasn't the landscape that caught his attention when he looked through the pictures later that night. In one of them, standing just over his left shoulder, was a dark blur. Not a smudge on the lens, not an accidental movement. It had the vague shape of a person, but featureless, like a silhouette swallowed by shadows. He squinted at the screen, zooming in. The closer he looked, the less sense it made. The figure had no real shape, no definition, just a shadow where no shadow should be. A chill crept up his spine. He didn't remember anyone standing behind him when he took that picture. In fact, he was sure he had been alone. Still, his rational mind took over. Maybe it was a flaw in the camera, an anomaly in the lighting. It was just one picture. He deleted it. The next sighting happened a week later. Adam had nearly forgotten about the strange photograph by then. Work had been hectic, and he barely had time to think about much else. He spent his days in front of his laptop, answering emails, making calls, trying to drown out the monotony of city life. One evening, as he scrolled through his phone, he paused at a new set of pictures, ones he had taken the day before at a friend's birthday party. His breath caught in his throat. There it was again, a dark figure barely visible, just behind him. It was faint, like a smudge on the lens, but unmistakable. This time, it was closer. He shivered. He didn't remember seeing anyone standing behind him when the picture was taken. The party had been crowded, sure, but the space behind him had been empty. He was sure of it. Maybe it was a trick of the light again. Maybe someone had moved at the last second. That's what he told himself as he deleted the photo. It kept happening. Every few days, Adam would take a new photo, at work, at a restaurant, during a casual walk through the park. And every time, the shadow was there. Sometimes it was just a faint blur. Other times, it had the shape of a person, standing just close enough to be unsettling. And each time, it was getting clearer. He stopped posting pictures on social media, stopped taking selfies. But it didn't matter. Whenever someone else took a picture of him, the shadow was still there, always behind his left shoulder, always watching. Adam started to notice other things too. At night, his apartment felt different. The air was heavier, like something unseen was pressing against the walls. The shadows in the corners seemed darker, deeper, stretching toward him when he wasn't looking. He started sleeping with the lights on. He told himself he was imagining things, that it was just paranoia from staring at the photographs for too long. But deep down he knew that wasn't true. One evening, Adam sat in his living room, scrolling through his phone with shaking hands. He had taken another picture that morning. He hadn't wanted to, but some old habit had made him raise his phone and press the shutter. He hadn't checked it until now. His stomach clenched as he stared at the screen. The shadow was no longer just a blur. It had a face, and it was smiling. Adam couldn't sleep. The image was burned into his mind. The last photograph, where the shadow wasn't just a blur anymore. It had a face. It was a woman. Her features were faint, like an old faded photograph left too long in the sun. But he could see her hollowed out eyes, sunken cheeks, and a thin, unnatural grin stretching across her face. She was standing directly behind him, closer than ever before. His hands trembled as he scrolled through his gallery, hoping, praying, that he had imagined it. But the picture was still there, unchanged. The longer he stared, the more he swore he could see the corners of her mouth twitch, the black pits of her eyes deepening as if they were looking right at him. He deleted the photo. Then he went to his recently deleted folder and erased it again. But it didn't matter. He could still see her face when he closed his eyes. Adam stopped taking pictures. For a while he tried to ignore it, to push it out of his mind. Maybe if he didn't acknowledge it, if he didn't take another photo, the thing would go away. But the presence didn't disappear. If anything, it was worse now. At work, he felt eyes on him, even in a crowded office, where coworkers bustled past him, where the hum of conversations filled the space. He still felt watched. At night, the air in his apartment was thick, suffocating. Shadows stretched unnaturally long across the walls, and sometimes, just before he turned off the light, he thought he saw movement in the corners of his vision. Once, as he passed by the hallway mirror, he thought he saw her, just for a second, a shape standing behind him, her face blurred but unmistakable. He didn't look again. A week later, Adam got a text from an old friend, Mark. It was a picture from a night out months ago, long before this nightmare started. A casual group photo at a bar, Adam in the center, grinning with a beer in hand. But something was wrong. The picture had changed. The shadow was there. At the time, that photo had been normal. He was sure of it. But now, behind his shoulder, the woman's face was faint, almost blending into the background. His stomach churned. Was it spreading? Did it go beyond new photos now? Frantically, he searched through old pictures, vacation albums, birthday parties, childhood photos. One by one, they all changed. The older the picture, the more transparent she was. Just a faint distortion, an imperfection. But in the newer ones, she was growing clearer, moving closer. Always closer. It wasn't just the photos anymore. The first time Adam heard the whisper, he thought it was his imagination, just the distant murmur of the city outside his window. But it wasn't. Late at night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he heard it again. A soft, raspy breath, faint words spoken too low to understand. The whisper came from the dark corner of his room. His heart pounded. He pulled the covers over his head like a child, squeezing his eyes shut. He didn't sleep that night. The next evening it happened again, and the night after that. The whispering grew louder. Adam avoided mirrors. He knew what he would see. Still, some things were unavoidable. The dark screen of his laptop, the glass of a subway window, even the reflection in a puddle on the sidewalk. They all held something unnatural. The woman was there. Her face wasn't always clear, but he could see the shape of her, just behind his shoulder, just on the edge of visibility. Sometimes her lips moved, whispering. He tried everything, burning old photographs, changing phones, even smashing the mirrors in his apartment. Nothing worked. The pictures kept changing. The whispers followed him everywhere. The last photo he received wasn't one he had taken himself. It was sent to him by an unknown number. No message, no context, just an image. It was a picture of him, sitting in his apartment, eyes wide with terror. And behind him, clear as day, the woman's face loomed over his shoulder, smiling. She wasn't a shadow anymore. She was real. Adam stared at his phone, his breath shallow, his hands slick with sweat. The photograph on his screen was impossible. It was taken from inside his own apartment. The angle suggested it had been snapped from the hallway, just outside his bedroom door. In the dim glow of his bedside lamp, he could see himself, sitting on the edge of his bed, his face pale, his eyes wide with terror. And behind him, towering over his shoulder, was her, no longer a shadow, no longer a blur, a woman with skin like decayed parchment, hollowed eyes sunken deep into her skull, and a grin so wide it stretched beyond the boundaries of her face. Her bony fingers hovered just above his shoulder, as if she were waiting. Adam dropped the phone, his chest tightening with panic. He spun around, expecting to see her standing there in the doorway. But the hall was empty. Silence. Only the soft hum of the city outside. His phone buzzed. A new picture. With trembling hands, he picked it up and looked. It was another image of him, from the same perspective. Except now, the woman's fingers weren't just hovering above his shoulder. Now, they touched him. Adam ran. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he couldn't stay in that apartment. He grabbed his coat and bolted down the stairs, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Out on the street, the city felt surreal. The lights too bright, the noises too distant. He ducked into an all-night diner, the fluorescent bulbs making his skin look sickly pale in the reflection of the window. He checked his phone again. The last picture was still there, unchanged. He tried calling Mark. No answer. He tried texting his sister, his parents, anyone. No replies. It was like the world was slipping away from him, like he was slipping away from the world. Something was wrong. At work the next morning, no one acknowledged him. Not in the usual way, not in the too busy to talk way. They didn't see him. He stood by his desk waiting for someone, anyone, to look his way. But his coworkers walked past, their eyes sliding right over him like he wasn't even there. He tried speaking. His voice sounded normal to his own ears, but no one reacted. He grabbed his boss's shoulder in desperation. Nothing. His fingers passed through, like mist, like he wasn't real anymore. His hands trembled. He grabbed his phone, flipping to his front-facing camera, but the screen showed only an empty office. He wasn't there. That night, Adam returned to his apartment, though it didn't feel like his anymore. Everything was the same. The unwashed dishes in the sink, the jacket draped over the back of the chair. But it was like walking through a memory instead of a real space. His reflection no longer showed in mirrors. His voice no longer echoed in the room. He pulled out his phone, dreading what he knew he would find. A new photograph. This time, it wasn't of him. It was of someone else. A man sitting at a cafe, laughing at something on his phone. And behind him, just barely visible, was Adam. Not a blur, not a shadow. A faint, transparent figure standing over the man's shoulder, his mouth open in a silent scream. Somewhere, in another part of the city, a man would soon scroll through his phone. He would notice something strange in his pictures, a shape that shouldn't be there, a whisper just outside his hearing. And with every new photo, the shape would become clearer, closer, until one day he would disappear, and someone else would take his place.